Hello, everyone. Welcome to Night with the Experts with Nuclear Energy Information Service. It's March 25th, 2021. And tonight we have a great topic. We are going to be talking about nuclear power corruption and bailouts, the Ohio story, with a little sprinkle of Illinois corruption thrown in. And we have two great experts on the Ohio story and our very own Dave Kraft on the Illinois side of it. So I just wanted to say a couple things. I'm hoping that everyone will keep their screen muted while our speakers are talking. And then also don't put anything in the chat, please, until our speakers are done, because it just creates a distraction while our speakers are talking. And when they're done, we'll say the chat is open. You can add things to the chat, share information. Our speakers will share information. Our board members share information in there. And also, if you would like to ask a question of our expert, you can type in there stack or I want to ask a question. You can type in your question. And then one of our board members, Jan Bodart, will be moderating the chat and telling you when you can ask your question, unmute, and discuss with our experts what you would like to ask them. So tonight, with most webinars, I just want to explain briefly how Night with the Experts work. With most webinars, usually the expert's speaking for 45 minutes and maybe a few people get to ask some questions at the end. And our plan with Night with the Experts was to be able to flip the script and allow the expert to speak, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then allow the people in attendance to spend a lot of time asking questions and creating some interesting dialogue. So that's what we're doing tonight. We'll let our speakers talk about the topic, and then we can have some questions via the chat. And so first, I would like to introduce, there's some rules there Dave put up on the screen. Just go on mute, chat box is closed. Stack. These are all the things that I was just saying. Oh yeah, and also I did want to add that this event is being recorded. So when you ask your question, that will be recorded, and then we will put that. We'll create a little bit more of an edited, tighter version of this evening's event and put that on our YouTube page. And there's some already on there from our previous nights with the experts, so you can go check those out. And it's going to take us about a week before we get this up on our YouTube page. So I would like to introduce our board members before we get started. So I would just like our board members to unmute. And we're very short on board members. People are all over the place this week. So Jan Bodart, I would like you to unmute, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jan Bodart, and I've been active in left political things for about 30 years now. And I started out as a clinic defender at abortion clinics, and joined 2 or 3 left groups, and finally decided I was an issue person, and NEIS was where I found my home finally.
I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Gail Snyder. I'm president of the board, and I've been doing this for quite a while now. I don't even know how many years, maybe Dave knows. Several years, and I also have mainly an interest in the nuclear issue, and that's how I got interested in it. I think my origin story really goes way back to the original No Nukes album and No Nukes concert that planted a seed when I was very young, and it grew, and then especially after Fukushima, it really exploded. And then we have Linda Lewison, who's going to be on and off tonight. She has another Zoom conflict, so I'm not sure if she is on right now to introduce herself, but we can bring her in later when she's on later. And we have some other board members who are out of town today in flight, so they can't be on a Zoom call from somewhere else. And then I would also like our director to introduce himself, Dave Kraft.
Hello, Dave Kraft here at NEIS in Logan Square, Chicago. And just want to make mention that this year in June, NEIS is I don't know about celebrating, but we're certainly going to observe our 40th anniversary. I apologize for that. We thought we would have won this issue many decades ago, but we're still around, so you got to put up with us. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the presentation tonight. And at the end of tonight's session, we'll have some announcements about future Night with the Experts, which are pretty exciting for Earth Month. Okay, back to you, Gail.
Okay. So, as I said, everyone, if you could just be vigilant about muting yourself, we appreciate it. So for the past half decade or more, the nuclear industry has adjusted its business model for earning profits, going from selling electricity to turning to state legislators and the federal government for various forms of bailouts, whether in the form of outright bailout subsidies or alleged market-based favoritism in the form of state legislation and linguistic detoxification, such as zero emission credits, ZECs for short. In Illinois and Ohio, these bailout schemes have been closely linked to corruption and cronyism, as well as FBI indictments and charges. So the links between nuclear bailouts and political corruption are going to be explored this evening using the Ohio example, where Speaker of the House, Larry Householder, and 4 others were criminally charged in a $60 million bribery scheme involving an Ohio nuclear facility owned by First Energy. And then additional commentary will be discussed or related to Illinois and the nuclear situation with House Speaker Michael Madigan and Exelon and ComEd, and that will be provided by our resident expert here in Illinois, Dave Kraft, who just introduced himself. So our experts this evening are Pat Marida. Did I say your name wrong, Pat?
Yes, that's right.
She is a Sierra Club National Nuclear Free Team member, as well as an overall Sierra Club member. Pat has been an anti-nuclear activist since 1981 when she joined the Ohio Nuclear Weapon Freeze campaign, where she served as a board member. For 9 years during the early 2000s, she chaired the Central Ohio Sierra Club. She was a member of the Ohio Sierra Club Executive Committee for 8 years. She chaired the Ohio Sierra Club Nuclear Free Committee from its inception until just this year. She is currently a core team member of the National Sierra Club's Nuclear Free campaign. Thank you, Pat, for being here tonight. Our other expert is Terry Lodge. He is an attorney. He is a recipient of the 2018 Judith Johnstrud Unsung Hero Award. He has taken numerous legal actions over the years against the nuclear industry and filing interventions with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and on and on and on. So I'm not going to spend a lot more time, but I would like to ask both Pat and Terry if there's something that you think is pertinent to this conversation that's in your bio that I didn't put in there. Please, add it as you discuss your topic, or if there's anything else you'd like to introduce about yourself. We're going to start with Pat. So, Pat, would you like to begin?
Okay, well, thank you, Gail and Dave, for inviting me to be an expert. I guess I won't say, you said plenty about me, so thank you very much. So I'll start by talking about nuclear bailouts to keep open existing reactors. Plus, of course, there are so many other subsidies that might be called bail-ins to get them going in the first place, and a myriad of ways to pick the public purse. So nuclear power was developed as a legitimizing front for the nuclear weapons industry. And the fundraising and technology overlap, and so that also amounts to hidden subsidies for power. So when the bit of history, y'all know the Price-Anderson Act, which limited corporate liability for accidents, and that was essential to the development of nuclear power. And that act was first passed in 1957, and it's been renewed several times. So back in 2011, the Union of Concerned Scientists came out with a report, and they called it Nuclear Power Still Not Viable Without Subsidies. And the report stated that in some cases, subsidies for the reactors actually exceeded the value of the electricity that was produced. So I live in Columbus, Ohio. And so I'll go and I'll start talking about the bailouts in our state. And what Gail was talking about was the infamous House Bill 6 was the number of the bill. And that bails out First Energy's aging, embrittled nuclear plants. It's Davis, Bessie, and Perry. They're both on Lake Erie, and it's about $1.3 billion. But it's really basically just a gift to First Energy because there aren't any strings attached to the bill. So it was illegal for Ohio to directly subsidize any particular energy source. So Ohio Republicans crafted House Bill 6 as the Ohio Clean Air Program. And the word nuclear is not in the bill. And besides bailing out the 2 nuclear plants, it bails out 2 First Energy coal plants. And these are old, really old, very hyper-polluting coal plants on the Ohio River. One of them is actually in Indiana. Believe it or not, we're bailing out a coal plant in Indiana. It guts renewable energy standards and abandons Ohio's efficiency standards. And so far, Ohio's efficiency standards have saved Ohioans $5.1 billion was calculated by Ned Ford. So House Bill 6, it was passed under some very unusual and very suspect circumstances. I'll say that Ohio is really close to evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats as far as voters are concerned. But due to the gerrymandering, Republicans have 60 of 99 members in the House and 24 out of 33 in the Senate. The bill couldn't have passed without the support of some Democrats because there were several free market Republicans who voted against it. So unlike most industry-backed proposals, House Bill 6, it was almost universally badmouthed by the media here in Ohio. It was opposed by ratepayer groups and business groups, and as I said, the free market conservatives and environmental groups. And I testified against it several times at the State House, and the only proponents there were those with actually vested interests. The legislature had recessed for the summer before the bill passed, but they were called back to vote on House Bill 6, and it passed by 1 vote. So our stance is actually communities and workers need aid, but not bailing out corporations, dirty industries, and especially not dishonest, terribly dishonest ones. So there was an attempt to get a referendum on the Ohio ballot to overturn House Bill 6. And millions of dollars in dark money was put into defeating that referendum. Firms were hired to harass and intimidate signature gatherers. Ohio was blanketed with fake petitions, so that people were confused about what they were signing. There were really strange ads just filled the media, and I got a number of mailers at my house. There was so much xenophobia; it was just really thick. It threatened a Chinese conspiracy to take over the energy grid, and I actually said that. A Chinese conspiracy to take over our energy grid. Later, it was found that First Energy paid most of the major signature gathering companies in Ohio to not gather signatures against House Bill 6. So the 90-day signature gathering time that they were allowed was shortened by 38 days while the ballot language was being approved. And the Ohio Supreme Court just sat on the request to reinstate the days. And so in January 2020, the petition drive ended. And so that was it. And then the following May, Energy Harbor, who was the new reactor owner, announced that they were adding $300 million to their annual share buyback. So instead of, that's what they did with their money, they're putting it into shareholder buyback. and that had a total of $800 million that year. A bit of background on First Energy and the new entity, Energy Harbor, that I just mentioned. First Energy really made out like a bandit in bankruptcy court. Because they divested themselves of liability. Their subsidiary, First Energy Solutions, which had owned the plant, came out of bankruptcy with a new name, Energy Harbor LLC, a limited liability corporation. So First Energy itself, as the distributor, is now completely separate from Energy Harbor. So they no longer have any liability. And First Energy was allowed to pay its bankruptcy expenses before distributing their assets to creditors. So they kind of really made out there in the bankruptcy court. So then just about exactly a year after House Bill 6 passed, the Ohio House Speaker, Larry Householder, and 4 others, men, were arrested on this $600 million bribery and racketeering scheme that Gail talked about, or surrounding House Bill 6. So $61 million in dark money was illegally funded into nonprofit groups by First Energy, and that was used to fund the election of legislators who were favorable to the passage of the bailout, and also, of course, used for stopping the subsequent repeal attempt. So since the arrests, then a whole plethora of things that revealed unsavory conduct, revelations we've had. So I've put in the chat a link to a paper listing these items. I'm going to put that in the chat now. There are hyperlinks in the document that go to articles on some of the events. So let me see if I can get that in the chat here. Okay, that's for y'all to have fun looking at. Okay, so some of the revelations. Well, first thing happened was the FBI, they subpoenaed Ohio House records related to 4 other bills that aimed to bail out nuclear plants. Then First Energy ousted CEO Chuck Jones and 2 other executives, plus top legal ethics officers. First Energy filed a motion to prevent executive deposition in the bribery investigation. Ohio's Attorney General, David Yost, sued and was backed up by the Ohio Supreme Court to stop collection and payment of the bailout money. An Ohio federal court ruled that Ohio ratepayers can proceed with the class action suit against First Energy, even though the state court already blocked the company from accepting fees. Now, Ohio's governor, Mike DeWine, he's been the recipient of many kinds of largesse from First Energy, including there was money, they gave money for his daughter's political race. Then a big deal was when the FBI raided the home of Sam Randazzo, who was the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, the PUCO chair, appointed by Governor DeWine. The FBI found that First Energy had paid $4.3 million to Randazzo's consulting firm at the time when he was acting as the Ohio regulator. So that scoundrel Randazzo, who had done everything he could to undercut licensing and siting of renewables, he resigned. And since that time, the Environmental Law and Policy Center has filed a motion to invalidate orders by the commission, by the PUCO, during Randazzo's tenure. First Energy actually obtained limited liability waivers from its lenders that struck down provisions in their loan agreements that required compliance with anti-corruption laws. And I'm not sure if such a thing is actually legal, but that's what happened. Last September, an auditor who examined First Energy's internal audit after the bribery arrests, he observed potential securities violations. And so he forwarded that information to the SEC. Now, the auditor is accusing First Energy of whistleblower retaliation. And the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they have subsequently opened an investigation into First Energy about, concerning the revelations, but the exact scope of all that, we don't know what that's about. Then the Public Utilities Commission issued a request for proposals looking for firms to audit First Energy's distribution modernization rider funds. And this rider was established in 2017, and 2 years later it was deemed illegal by the Ohio Supreme Court. But not before the company had collected about $200 million a year in improper funds, and they weren't subjected to be refunded. They weren't subject to be refunded. So the courts ruled that First Energy does not have to pay back that money. And now the PUCO is exploring whether those funds were improperly used to support House Bill 6. In order to avoid a shareholder resolution, First Energy made an agreement with a New York pension fund, which was its largest shareholder, and that was to issue a public report disclosing its political expenditures for at least the next 3 years. The Cleveland Plain Dealer had an article that said it shouldn't take a New York pension fund to force First Energy political spending more into the open. It's like, why wasn't Ohio asking them? So last month, Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose filed 162 different campaign finance charges against Larry Householder and 4 political operatives, the ones that were arrested. And Householder is accused of using $950,000 of his campaign funds to pay his defense lawyers since the bailout, since they were the arrests. And House Bill 6 tentacles reach to the governor's office. They show that Sam Randazzo, that resigned PUCO chair, met with Householder, the speaker, and the governor in April of 2019. They met at DeWine's house for an energy discussion. And House Bill 6 was introduced the very next day. So I guess the last thing I want to say is that the Ohio legislature has dragged its feet, to say the least, in repealing House Bill 6. The first repeal bills all died at the end of 2020. And in the new legislature, full repeal bills and a number of partial repeal bills have been introduced. And as of yesterday, March 24th, both houses have passed House Bill 128. And it is a bill that removes, as far as we can tell, only removes the nuclear subsidy. Now, Speaker Householder voted for this bill, but in a strange twist of fate, First Energy had already asked not to receive the bailout because, some of you may have heard, there was a FERC, a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They filed a minimum offer price rule, which meant that First Energy would have to charge more money for electricity if they were state subsidized in the auction. So First Energy really didn't want the nuclear bailout. So we think maybe the legislature might be playing into First Energy's hands if the coal bailout, which is indirect, and renewable and efficiency standards, the abandonment of those, if that remains in force. So I'll stop here, but I'll just add that First Energy stock was cut to junk rate, by all three major rating firms. So Terry's going to talk, I think, about dark money and decoupling, and I have put some background on First Energy subsidies and dirty tricks that happened before the bailout. That's in that link that I have there, and I can talk about that later on if anybody's interested. So thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Pat. That was a lot to go through, and for those of us who've heard a little bit and tried to follow the story, and I think it filled in a couple pieces that I didn't have. So thank you so much. Terry, thank you for being here tonight, and we really appreciate you being here and all the work you have done over the years in so many ways to battle the nuclear industry. I don't. If you have something you would like to add to your bio that would help explain to people what you've done and how long you've been doing it, please add that to what
I've
you're
been
going
doing
to
it
say.
a long time. Let's just leave it at that.
All right.
When I was in law school, one of the proudest things in my resume, and I only had a tiny part in it, but when I was still in law school, I worked with I live in Toledo, Ohio, which is about 230 miles due east of Chicago. Anyway, I was involved with a grassroots group with some very bright people, which is what grassroots groups most often have, in an intervention in a state power siting commission proceeding, 1977, that was to determine the economic need for 4 nuclear power plants to be built on Sandusky Bay, which is a very shallow 8 to 10 foot deep estuary of Lake Erie, about 50 or so miles east of Toledo. This was to be the largest aggregate of nuclear power plants in the United States. There were fantasy notions in the 70s of nuclear power. President Nixon had predicted and promoted the fact that by the year 2000, there would be 1,000 nuclear reactors in the United States. Fortunately, economics and 3 Mile Island pretty much destroyed that notion. But in 1977, there was an 8-week length hearing at a branch campus of Bowling Green State University in Huron, Ohio. And we grassrooters, along with some interveners, some really interesting folks from Cleveland, just people, just citizens who had also intervened and weren't lawyers and didn't have great specialties, but were very studious and very incredible in their cross-exam and stuff like that. We participated in this hearing before an administrative judge for 8 weeks, and it ended. The judge set up a briefing schedule, which was something like we had to put written closing arguments into form and submit them to the agency by, I don't know, let's say October, November of 1977. And then about 2 or 3 weeks before that deadline arrived, the Grand Utility Consortium, which became First Energy, it was 5 different utility companies ranging from Western Pennsylvania to Toledo Edison. They asked for a 90-day deferral, so there would be no decision, no brief submitted. Then they asked for a 180-day deferral, and then they asked for a 1-year deferral. They kept asking for these extensions of time to not have to file closing arguments and all of that. And in 1981, in the largest single cancellation of nuclear power proposals in the history of the world, they canceled all 4 nukes. It was an incredibly gratifying moment, and also an "I told you so" moment. And that's kind of the theme that I want to briefly talk about. The theme about nuclear power is it has always been uneconomical, It has always been unworkable and dangerous. It has always had all of the negatives that we were told early on, that we were just sort of imagining or worst casing, doomsaying. But 50 years on, 45 years on, and that I can tell you that it's all true. It was all true then. It's incredibly more compellingly the case now. I don't consider myself an expert on the bailout. What I am is a goddamned angry victim of the bailout. Democracy in Ohio has been on tenterhooks on the edge for a long time. It got shoved over the edge by what, frankly, in retrospect, is an all too familiar and predictable scenario. And that is the second point I want to make, that the economics predominantly of nuclear energy are controlling a huge chunk, gaping pieces of our political dialogue, our transformation into the 21st century. And it's really amazing how it's happened. And again, something that was foreseeable decades ago by a lot more perceptive people than me. In 1977, we put on our one and only expert witness in that Power Siting Commission hearing. He was a right-wing libertarian economist in St. Paul who had written a book that probably circulated to 1,500 people. And he said, nuclear energy is unworkable, and its economics, it will be hoist on its own petard because its economics simply are unimaginable. And he's long dead. He was a brilliant witness. The hearing officer listened to him and took a hell of a lot of notes, far more than I noticed he took of the utility economists who were predicting, 1,000 reactors in 25 years. He was right. Capitalism, ironically, killed the nuclear genie, or is killing it now. Not fast enough, but it is certainly happening, and there are some inevitable factors that are rolling into place. One of the things that, just a few observations that I have are that Generation Now was this dark money front group that the 61 million bucks was funneled through in Ohio. It's a 501c4, that's an IRS designation. It's a social welfare organization. The problem with our corrupt politics is that 501c4 organizations do not, under federal law, have to disclose their donors. They're nothing but conduits, or can be nothing but conduits. And the corporations and the moneyed interests that are pouring money through them, and this is true certainly well beyond the utility sector, well beyond First Energy. Oh, and incidentally, my favorite thing that came out of this whole scandal is that Energy Harbor was this new corporation that owns the 2 nukes and the 2 coal-fired plants now, and not First Energy anymore. And some wag, the Environmental Working Group, I think, dubbed Energy Harbor is now, according to him, Pirates Cove, very appropriately. But dark money groups don't have to disclose their identities, the identities of their donors. But interestingly, the states, including Ohio even, are free to require federally designated IRS-approved dark money nonprofits. They are free to require disclosure of donations, 100% disclosure. And interestingly, there are even a few corporate Republicans in and outside of the Ohio General Assembly who have been talking about doing just that. It's a weak, minuscule reform, but it would certainly be interesting if the donors knew that we were going to know that they were handing over 61 million bucks to Generation Now. Generation Now was simply created as a funnel And it was charged because it's a corporation. It was indicted for crimes related to the bribery scandal, and its officers pled the corporation guilty a few weeks ago. And this is a nonprofit, nothing. This is a paper, insubstantial nothing, a legal fiction. And one of the things that is a telling tale of 2021, 120 years ago, when corporations and corporate law was a little bit different, it was possible for prosecutors and attorney generals to shut down and terminate, create capital punishment, if you will, killing a corporation as punishment for crimes its officers committed. The Generation Now plea deal, and this is a piece of paper. I'm a little aghast at this, but it's telltale. They pled guilty on behalf of Generation Now, and its punishment is probation and a fine. The court could order it to be dissolved and would not. I also would like to talk about the utility economy. The political economy now of the utility industry is in crisis circumstances if you are on the side of Pirates Cove. It's because huge baseload plants are not sustainable. They are no longer realistic. And they haven't actually been for some time. But the utility industry, in peddling reliable, safe, blah, 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 nuclear and coal, and even to some extent natural gas baseload power plants, essentially is selling the fact that you always have to be able to back up other plants that might fall down, that might go out of service. In Ohio, Davis-Besse, nuclear plant about 30 miles southeast of Toledo on Lake Erie, had the third worst, they were third from the bottom in terms of their performance for the first 4 years of operation. Davis-Besse was a clone of 3 Mile Island and operated terribly and dangerously, even from its inception in 1978 into operation. And so you had this giant baseload plant that would, as nuclear power plants more than coal or gas, are prone to simply dying, simply going out, just going off the grid, shutting down because of automated safety considerations or sometimes operator intervention. So what you have is a utility economy that's evolving to wind and power, which are what we call infill types of energy sources. You can scale up if you can gradually increase the number of generators putting electricity into the grid in accordance with actual need, as opposed to, well, in 1990, from the perspective of 1975, we're going to need 500 nuclear power plants because we see unlimited growth. Instead, you can look 2 or 3 years out, see what your current economic trends are, what the possible and likely growth patterns would be, and say we're going to need 100 more wind generators. We're going to need 600 more acres, including awnings and unused land and brownfields and all that, for distributed solar, or implementing conservation measures at an industrial scale. But you can foresee and plan and do that in short order. And plus, of course, when those things break, it's one small generating source that breaks, not something that is putting out 1,000 megawatts like Davis-Besse. And interestingly, when they break down, they don't emit radiation. So even if there's a bad accident at a large-scale wind generator, it can throw a blade, and that can wreak some pretty awful, nasty havoc and all that. But the chances of it killing, maiming, causing cancers to thyroid cancers to thousands of people are probably less than zero. So the thing is, we're looking at a transformation where the multiplicity of small generating sources is, pardon me, I'm getting signals I better plug in or you'll lose my valuable observations. So you're looking at a situation where the multiplicity of relatively easily ordered and constructed energy sources is competing with natural gas and with huge baseload dinosaur plants. I am most recently involved in the fight to try to keep the Point Beach 2-unit nuclear power plant up the shore in Wisconsin from getting a 20-year extension so it can operate from the early 2030s to the early 2050s. The utilities plan is to run that sucker for a total of 80 years, which ain't what it was designed for and isn't what it can economically really sustain. Point Beach is on a very lucrative life support arrangement right now. They have a locked-in contract with Wisconsin Electric Power Company to provide all of their electricity to WEPCO, which is now called WE, until the early 2030s, and then presumably they're going to try to get that sweetheart deal extended. The economics of it, however, are that our economics expert, Mark Cooper, who's probably the leading anti-nuclear utility economist in the country, just in the past week has provided a written expert statement that we submitted to the commission the other day, that between now and the early 2030s, Point Beach is going to gouge its customer base by nearly $6 billion. He estimated it leveled off to be $300 per household in the generating jurisdiction per year. So every month, give me $25. Don't ask any questions. Give me $25. Oh, and it's another month, so you have to give me another $25 for nothing. His projection was that compared with the real world cost of electricity right now, the real world being a blend still of some coal, nuclear, and a growing share of photovoltaic and wind, that the cost is at least $25 a month per average household less than Wisconsin ratepayers are paying. Think about all of this talk we've been swirling in for months about stimulus checks and $600 a household and $1,400. Think what the economy of Wisconsin could have looked like in 2020 and 2021 without being gouged monthly for $25, $300 a year. It's an enormous sum of money when you talk about local scale economics. Anyway, I think I should probably stop and we should talk more about other topics through your questions, but I want to, this whole participation has brought to mind a quote by if I can find it, there we go. Tom Johnson was the mayor of Cleveland from 1901 to 1909, and he is remembered and revered by some of us in Ohio. That period from the late 1890s to just before World War I is remembered by historians as a progressive period, but by people who really read history as a period of what is called municipal socialism. It was when public utilities or trolleys or early motorized buses or electricity and gas were being formed. For instance, in Toledo, the electric system was county owned until 1907, when a fledgling Toledo Edison company was formed and acquired it from the elected class. Tom Johnson was not a radical. He was a very prudent businessman and extremely self-made, who had made a great deal of money in the late 1890s by developing in several cities traction systems, which were, of course, electric trolleys. The fastest early growth happened around selling sort of a package deal to a city where they would generate their own electricity and it would power public lighting, street lights, and electric trolleys. And it was a very popular and effective way of improving intra-city transit. It was a big deal when you're talking about transitioning from horses and buggies. Anyway, Tom Johnson founded, and defended stoutly Cleveland's publicly owned utility, which exists to this day, Muni Light. And it has been repeatedly ravaged and attacked over the years by First Energy, and before it, Cleveland Electric Illuminating, which was ultimately folded into First Energy. But in any event, and Dennis Kucinich took up the fight in the 70s. And I could bore you for a long time with war stories of the legal work I did in conjunction with the city of Cleveland and when Kucinich was mayor, but I won't. It was just an honor to be there. But one of Tom Johnson, the mayor of Cleveland, one of the comments he made in the middle, about 1905 or 1906, in the middle of some of the utility wars where the fledgling Edison subsidiary was was competing head to head with household electrical service sales with the fledgling municipal utility in Cleveland. Tom Johnson, there were court battles, there were political fights in city council. He's mayor. He is a stout advocate of municipally owned, the municipal socialism, in fact, was what the movement was called. Anyway, he famously said, quote, "I believe in municipal ownership of waterworks, of parks, of schools. I believe in the municipal ownership of these monopolies because if you do not own them, they in turn will own you. They will rule your politics, corrupt your institutions, and finally destroy your liberties." And 110, 15 years later, it is utterly true. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. As we can all see, you have been there a long time with
Don't remind me.
long history that you have there, institutional knowledge of this topic. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn this over to Dave Kraft, Director of NEIS, to talk about the Illinois bailout situation saga soap opera.
All right, I will keep this brief. And I would point out that we went a little longer than we usually do in terms of speakers tonight, but the topic is so important that they really need to have the time to get the information out. I'm just going to make a few comments on how we connect the dots to the situation in Ohio, not being some sort of isolated one-off thing, but as part of a national pattern of how the utilities are operating to try and squeeze every last dollar they can out of a dying industry. So I'll try and get this in about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to you folks who are here patiently waiting to get your questions asked. And you can start getting those ready to drop in the chat box. So here we go. Around 2015, 2016, Tim Judson, the director of NEIS, and I went up to the Midwest Renewable Energy Fair in Wisconsin. And at that time in Illinois, there was a big push for a piece of legislation called FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act. And the crux of FEJA was that there would be a $2.3 billion bailout over 10 years, which would bail out the 2 Quad Cities Exelon reactors on the Mississippi River and the single Clinton nuclear reactor in central Illinois. We went up to the Midwest Renewable Energy Fair to try and get and speak to the various vendors of renewable energy, the providers, the engineers, the folks who were doing it, and saying, hey, look, you better take a look at what the nuclear industry is doing because they are going to undercut you guys tremendously and you're not going to have business if they get all of these bailouts. Well, we were met with a thunderous round of indifference. The renewables people really didn't get involved heavily in any of the legislation, not only in Illinois, but in the other states where this was being attempted, such as New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and as you hear now, Ohio. So what we were trying to get across is that the new business model of the nuclear utilities like Exelon was to engage in what we call the nuclear hostage crisis. The first step of the crisis is to announce we're losing money and we're going to have to close our plants down if we don't get some sort of help, because we're not being appreciated for all of the wonderful environmental benefits we provide, such as low carbon production of electricity. Well, that's the first step. And when that happens, that of course gets all of the mayors of the local communities and all the workers from the plants and all the unions associated with those plants up in arms about woe is us, we're going to lose our jobs, there goes the tax base. Oh, you know, it's a crisis. The third part then is they take that beef to their state legislators and say, better bail out Exelon or all these jobs are going to go away. And then as we found in 2016, our then Governor Rauner, in cooperation with the now not quite indicted House Speaker Michael Madigan, who is under an FBI investigation, but not yet indicted, kind of caved, and they gave Exelon the $2.3 billion bailout. Well, fast forward to now, in Illinois, we have a bill called CEJA, C-E-J-A, Clean Energy Jobs Act. There is no direct bailout in there, but Exelon learned its lesson and they kind of modified the plan. They don't go after direct bailouts anymore. They look for so-called, well, we call them pseudo-market solutions, such as getting capacity market reform, which would still get them the income some of the income they would need to subsidize their reactors. And they've also made it in such a way where they team up with the renewables people, who would also be penalized and not get money if the capacity market is not fixed. So the industry will always try and find a way, as around many of the what seem to be successes or just market directions, that nuclear is over. And Exelon is doing that in the CEJA legislation as well. Now, this is not to wrap the people who are trying to get more renewable energy or energy efficiency on the boards. We really need to do that. And the CEJA legislation is very comprehensive and goes well beyond just cranking out electrons. It really integrates many of the aspects of energy production that are ignored traditionally in energy legislation, such as just transitions, such as community energy, distributed power, local ownership, and things like that. No other legislation does that. But Exelon managed to get a little poison pill in there that in order to get all of those things, you got to bail out the nukes through some mechanism. So this is how I wanted to bring the tie into Ohio. Our situation is different. Our speaker has not been arrested or indicted. That may happen yet. We'll never know. And also, you know, the other people have not been arrested. But the thing that baffled us was in Illinois, the subsidiary of Exelon, Commonwealth Edison, was the company that really got hammered by the FBI. They were indicted, they pled guilty, and they had to pay a $200 million fine. Now that fine will be given back in 2 years if ComEd exhibits good behavior and cooperates with the government. At the same time also, we have a colleague group of ours, the Illinois Public Interest Research Group, IPIRG, which is saying, hey, why should that $200 million go to the government? It should go back to the ratepayers. So you have a local activist group saying, hey, this was ratepayer money that got stolen, give it back to the ratepayers. Along the same time, though, our group was making the contention, you think $200 million was bad. What about the $2.3 billion bailout that they got, possibly using the same illegal lobbyists? When are we going to get that money back? When we bring up that issue, nobody bites. All we get are the starting rotation for the Cubs and who's going to be the next quarterback for the Bears and how's the weather today. And, oh, I'm sorry, we have to go now. So nobody is looking at the $2.3 billion bailout the same way they are this $200 million fine that Exelon or that ComEd was imposed. So again, it just lays out the example here of how this corruption is so deep, pervasive. And the last piece I'll leave you with, and before I turn it back to Gail, you don't have to believe a word I said, but I think it was Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear who turned this up. Several years ago, there was an industry conference going, and somebody managed to get in there at a time when one of the presenters, who was a consultant for energy companies, was doing a PowerPoint which literally states that this is a business model for the industry. You create a situation where you need bailouts. It's really going to up your bottom line. Your stock's going to look good. Check it out, folks. So it's not us talking. It's the industry itself that has gamed this system for the last 7 years and continues to do so. So I'll leave it there, turn it back to Gail, and now you get your big chance.
Does somebody want to ask a question? We're just overwhelmed. Catherine, did you? Oh, Mike Keegan, unmute yourself.
Hello. I recently saw the name Carl Icahn. Is he involved? Corporate raider?
Ask, who do you want to try to answer that?
Either Pat or Terry.
I don't know.
I think I have seen his name in connection with Carl Icahn is a renowned corporate dismantler who basically is very wealthy, and he buys corporations and squeezes and milks them until it sheds workers, destroys benefits, undermines pension systems and all that, until he's basically pumped and dumped the corporation. Bails out. Yes.
Well, where's the money coming from? They got bailed out First Energy a couple years ago. Didn't $2.5 billion come in from private investor venture capitals? Because now that capital has to be served. I mean, they could fold the House Bill 6, and they did it with the House Bill 128 today, I guess. But that capital is still going to keep controlling the game. Who are the puppeteers?
I don't know. I am part of the puppeteers, and part of it is certain self-destructive impulse. Large pension funds are oftentimes investors traditionally in utilities because of the stability and regularity of the benefits of the the dividends that are paid on shares. Part of the problem, I think, is educating unions, particularly construction trades, that get a lot of work in refueling outages and other things associated with installing retrofits at nuclear power plants. But that has been a long time problematic thing where if they have a controlling influence over pension funds, that they direct them into unhealthy, unwise investments, thinking that it's, of course, the right thing to do for their memberships. I am sure that there is a great deal of money and liquidity floating around in the utility industry that crosses over into the weapons complex and to weapons manufacturers because of the close necessary ties between nuclear power and nuclear waste and nuclear weapons. But that's about all I can tell you.
Well, if you want to talk about bailouts, like back in around the 2001, First Energy received about $9 billion for stranded costs when Ohio's utilities were deregulated. And so if they managed to blow $9 billion in profits in 20 years and then not have any, need a bailout again, that's pretty amazing.
David Hughes and Kevin Camps have posted some really interesting stories, facts in the chat. I want to make note of related to Carl Icahn.
It looks like he purchased 2 seats on the First Energy Board for $200 million. That's what David says. Are we ready for the next question? Is there anybody, do you want to say any more, Pat or Terry or David?
Nope.
Okay, our next question comes from Evan.
You're skipping Kevin Camp's questions.
That's all right.
Oh, those are his comments. I didn't see him asking.
He has a question at the end of the first long comment.
Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, my question is, the part that kills me the most is we've talked about, or you guys have talked about all these massive bailouts in different states. And the part that kills me the most is that not a penny of those bailouts goes into something like dealing with the cracked shield building at Davis Bessie, for example. And
Right.
It's the most, the public, I mean, there would be an assumption that if you're getting all this free money from the public, that you might address the catastrophic safety risks at your nuke with that money, at least a little bit. So I just wondered if you'd comment on that.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. One of the things about Point Beach, up the Wisconsin shore near Green Bay, for those of you who like drinking water, Point Beach, one of the units, is regarded by the NRC as the most embrittled reactor vessel in the United States. And of course, somebody's got to be first and somebody's got to be last. I recognize that. But what it means is, according to Arnie Gunderson, who is one of our expert witnesses, that you have to, as a reactor operator, you have to mediate in an emergency crisis situation between the need, you have to really understand what you're about to do before you push the button. If you have an emergency situation where the reactor, there may be a crack or a rupture and suddenly water is gushing out at hundreds of pounds per square inch of pressure, you have to replace it very quickly with a sudden suck in of thousands of gallons a minute from Lake Michigan. You have to get it exactly right or you will cause a nuclear disaster, catastrophe. He says in his sworn declaration to the NRC, you have to get it perfect. And the cure for having a so severely compromised a reactor vessel is an incredibly expensive, never been tried process called annealing. And you don't hear the utility saying, oh, we're going to fix that. We don't want people to be scared. The utilities approach is to make damn sure that as few of us as possible know that there's any reason to be frightened. And that is utterly true for many other long-standing problems. In 1975, at Browns Ferry, there was an insulation fire. Thermolag insulation had been produced and was supposed to be fireproof, and specifically for power plants, that's a big deal because you can have a long-lasting fire that moves through the circuitry or moves through openings in the wall, similar to a house fire, but it's a utility plant and it's a big structure. And there was a very dangerous fire where thermolag actually contributed to the heat, lasted for, I believe, 2 or 3 days. And the NRC put out a serious urgent warning throughout the industry, setting loosey-goosey deadlines for them to pull all of your thermolag insulation out and replace it with something that's really fireproof. And they kept giving extensions and giving extensions and giving extensions. And we discovered in the license extension for 20 years at Davis Bessie in 2011, 2012, we discovered that they still had been getting variances from the NRC and had never replaced something from 35 years before. So deferred maintenance, it's not deferred, it is never, never land. They don't put any money back into these things, and as my old cars get older, they break down and they cost me more, and I have to make a decision about fishing or cutting bait, right? Do I do this valve job, or do I just give up the ghost? Unfortunately, my economic situation and the environment in which I function doesn't provide me with subsidies to keep my 1994 Ford Ranger on the road. I have to make the decision every time.
I'll chime in here that it really is an industry. It's the product. It's what they want to do is run the plants into the ground. That makes and then when they're done, they'll just abandon them. We have a long list of Michael Keegan has made them, and I've tried to compile them of continuing to give First Energy, and I'm sure all other nukes around the country, waivers on nuclear safety and maintenance. So these are like longer periods between inspections, no requirement for emergency plans to be updated, no requirement for implementation of flooding mitigation, no requirement to comply with recommendations from Fukushima lessons learned, and intervals between containment, intervals between inspections are extended. Exemption from record retention requirements, exemption from the definition of a physical barrier, that apparently barbed wire is a good enough physical barrier for Davis-Besse. And Kevin, you can maybe chime in on that. That's what my understanding is.
Just before Mike, just a second, to follow on what Pat's saying, you have to understand the melodrama that's played out around House Bill 6. The First Energy Corporation sends notices to the NRC that we are terminating operations in, 2020 or 2021 at Davis-Besse and Perry. And this is like 2018, 2019. And the utility then uses the fact that we're about to shut down. So can you please cut us a break, and we don't have to do this walk down, and we don't have to have a team of engineers that costs a bunch of money come in and do a week-long analysis of the electrical circuitry and all that. And those kinds of breaks are readily granted by the utility. House Bill 6 passes. All of those breaks, all of those waivers stay in effect, but suddenly the plant is going to, Davis-Besse and Perry are going to live to maybe break down another day, another 6 or 7 years hence. So it's a great manipulation, very cynical.
All right, thank you. Well, and I'll just summarize my question, the question I wrote, or repeat it. The city of Chicago this year, or this past fall, the Innovation Committee entertained some proposals regarding the ComEd contract, which is coming up for renewal with the city in 2021. And among those proposals was one to turn ComEd into a municipal utility. I was inspired by your reminder of the Cleveland Muni Power history. It seems to me that in the context of both the corruption scandal and the push for a renewable strategy, that the CEJA legislation, at least raises the prospects of this sort of integration that might occur with a public power ComEd leading the charge rather than an Exelon subsidiary. That could be a great step towards energy democracy. And I guess potentially, to the degree that Exelon gets broken up a little, that would be a good thing in terms of addressing its power in Illinois and elsewhere. So do you have any thoughts about how the ComEd municipal power campaign might work into this notion of dealing with the corruption scandal and nuclear in Illinois? from your experience. Thank you.
My observation, first of all, is you need to be fully informed as to what the tariff arrangements or what charter allowed agreements have been made with Commonwealth. How long are they allowed and guaranteed the right to do business, guaranteed a monopoly within the city limits? Because what you're basically probably talking about is, and I don't know what the status of initiative is in the law of initiative in Illinois, but you would be talking about a charter amendment terminating the deal and, facing, of course, threats of litigation and all that, and having to make some type of compensation arrangements. But you may also be at a right moment in history when some of those suckers are just going to realize that we're dying and we better cash in and get out. And you may be able to negotiate some pretty favorable terms to acquire the grid. We attempted to do that 30 years ago in Toledo. It didn't go all the way through. The politicians killed it, but it was 30 years ago. First, acquaint yourself with the semi-permanence of the arrangements with the utility, and talk and get someone that is very astute in utility economics in this particular circumstance. We're talking, incidentally, one last thing, and I won't go on, but our economics expert in Point Beach, Mark Cooper, basically delineates a story about the fact that there's this war that's going on sort of beneath our collective radar, where the dinosaur utilities, who still have all of the, a great deal of the clout and a great deal of the money and lobbyists, et cetera, are still able to control or manipulate a lot of the legalistic aspects of utility management and ownership. They're collapsing, they're eroding, but it isn't quite a free fall yet, but it's coming.
Okay, our next question comes from Joyce Blumenthal.
Yeah, hi, and thank you. And this kind of follows up on Terry's comment, because for us here in Illinois, following up from what you all in Ohio had happen, seriously, how do we overcome the power not only of the big utilities, but they've got labor, and I'm all for union labor, but they got labor, they got the communities, the mayors, all the people in the towns by the plants. How do we overcome that in a legislative situation, not to mention the dark money that influences the public from all these ads?
One, and I don't mean to cut you out, Pat, or anyone else, Dave, but I just want to say one other thing. Was our third expert witness in Point Beach is a retired physicist from the University of Toledo who wrote an inspire. In fact, I think I'll post his. I think I have the URL here. He wrote an incredible decimation of the prospects of Point Beach surviving against solar in the next 10 years. His prediction with high confidence is that, like it or not, the jobs, which will be skilled trades employment for photovoltaic solar, are going to be burgeoning. So for a start, getting the construction trades to weaning them from the dying cancerous teat is a big deal. Beyond that is simply the fact that looking in practicality at utility, NextEra, which is a giant multi-state utility, it's a successor actually to Florida Power and Light. NextEra owns Point Beach in Wisconsin. Duane Arnold, which is a nuclear power reactor in Iowa that closed just last September, NextEra announced a week ago that they're going to build a gigantic photovoltaic solar farm on the site of the Duane Arnold nuclear power plant. These guys are playing both sides, and that is something to also take a close look at. That the utilities are, they they're evil and greedy and mean, but they are not stupid. Their advisors are telling them, you know, you guys, all you can do is like sort of holding maneuvers. You can try to contain the riot, but ultimately you're going to be overrun. And so they're hedging their bets.
Well, one of the other things we can do is elect better legislators, people that are going to appoint persons with integrity to the agencies and so forth. And right now, Ohio is there's some legal constraints happening, but Ohio is scheduled, with the census we have to make more compact all the districts, whether the state and the federal, and they have to redraw those boundaries. So this is going to be an important issue. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about, how do we stop the gerrymandering, but that'll make if that happens well, it would make a big difference in Ohio's politics.
Okay, thank you so much. David, did you want to say anything about this?
Oh, well, actually, I was going to respond to David and Melanie's thing about the city of Chicago just for a minute. And I just wanted to mention, there are a lot of folks on the call tonight who are not from Illinois, so they're not as familiar with the Chicago situation. But about 2 years ago, a call went out to municipalize the Chicago electric system. And that primarily came from the Democratic Socialists of America's group, which happens to be down the hall from our office here. And they elected 5 alder people to the 50-person City Council of Chicago, who then put up this proposal to municipalize Commonwealth Edison. Last year, City of Chicago hired a consultant to do a feasibility study, and then they released their results, which essentially said it was not economically possible or feasible to do. We took a look at the study, and they really left out an awful lot of things that they didn't bother analyzing, which might have made it possible or feasible. So that's one thing I would mention. But the other is that right now the city of Chicago is broke, and they've flat out said they're not interested in municipalizing at all. In the meantime, within the last couple of months, you probably have followed the news that Exelon Corporation is in the process of perhaps spinning off, well, not in the process, it is going to spin off its generation units from its distribution and transmission companies, which would include Commonwealth Edison. So how this is going to impact things, it's hard to say, first of all, but given the last question from Joyce, Illinois politics is just as weird as any other state. We don't know how that's really going to play out, because right now everybody's kind of jockeying for a whole new level of political influence. I kind of liken the situation as Yugoslavia after Tito died, where everyone is trying to form new alliances and nobody knows who's going to come out on top. And it's kind of strange right now. So those power lines are really unpredictable at the moment and not settled. You have the situation with the Exelon breakup adding to that confusion. But there is some speculation that this breakup might make it easier for Exelon to actually get some form of financial relief, whether it's through the capacity market reform in CEJA or something else, if they separate from ComEd. So long answer, short question, but very complex. I would just end it by saying currently city government in the city of Chicago is not on board for municipalizing.
Well,
Okay. Go ahead, Pat.
Well, if I may add, when we're talking about public power, I just want to add that up in Cleveland, Mayor Frank Jackson said the city, they now plan to sue First Energy because it has been attacking Cleveland public power. And it turned out that a group calling itself Consumers Against Deceptive Fees, and this dark money group continually blasted Cleveland public power over its rates. But it turns out that Consumers Against Deceptive Fees, they received $200,000 in 2019 from a dark money nonprofit, and I think that was called Partners for Progress. And that Partners for Progress has been tied to First Energy. So apparently the city of Columbus is going to, or the city of Cleveland is going to go after First Energy. So that every dirty trick, you really want to deep six your competition.
I wanted to apologize to Joyce. I got her name wrong. Her name is Joyce Blumenstein, not Thal. And so now our next question comes from Evan. After that, it's Stephen Sondheim, then Catherine, and Linda has a question. So Evan, what's your question?
Yeah, I guess the question's for Pat and for Dave. So when FIJA was being passed in Illinois, I was a volunteer leader and activist, and I lobbied my then state senator, who was a pretty fair environmentalist when we were in his office. And I was appalled to hear him say that the energy bill was going to be an agreed upon bill. Those were his words. I'd never heard that term before, an agreed upon bill. And I asked him to tell me what it meant, and he said that ComEd was going to have to agree upon the terms of the deal. And he's since had to resign. Well, first he wore a wire and in the investigation of person one in Illinois, and he's since had to resign, which is kind of sad for me. But still, I never respected that statement, and I want to know why organizations like Cub haven't called me up to find out what the heck was going on, and why our public accountability groups aren't engaging with that $2.4 billion ripoff that we had to suffer. I challenged him. I said, so where are the activists? I haven't seen them. I've been to Springfield. I didn't see any nuclear activists there. I've been to, following this in the news. I didn't see activists there. This was a fixed deal, and I'm waiting for accountability. So maybe Pat and Dave, you can tell me, where are the principles in this?
We were there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I love NEIS and I support NEIS, but we need larger people, larger organizations. And
sure.
Yeah.
Well, Pat, is there anything you wanted to say first? Because I know this was largely an Illinois kind of question, but.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay. Now, we're getting into the history of what happened, and Evan got it totally right. It was a cut deal all along. And back then, remember, the politics was different, first of all. It was a legislature controlled by Michael Madigan, the former Speaker of the House. Nothing moved unless he wanted it moved. And he had close ties to labor, as has been pointed out elsewhere, I think, by Joyce. So the politics was that no energy legislation of any kind was going to go forward unless it got the okay of Exelon ComEd, Michael Madigan, and maybe the governor. And that's precisely what happened at the end with FIJA. A couple of weeks before the due date, there was a closed backroom deal that got cut. In fact, it was outrageous because at the time, Exelon was only asking for a 5-year thing, and then Governor Rauner gave him 10 years. So we weren't even a part of that discussion. We did go down and testify, unfortunately, against FIJA and against the fact that renewable energy was tied to it. But that was the politics of 2016. You wouldn't get any renewables. You wouldn't get anything unless Exelon and ComEd got their pound of flesh. So that was the deal that got cut. As Linda pointed out, Linda is one of our board members. We were down there, but I think at best we are tolerated by the Illinois environmental community because the messages we bring are extremely unpopular and put them in a very difficult position where they're not able to, they're going to have to take a stand on nuclear, and they don't want to do that because it threatens the politics, the political connections they have, the connections with labor they might have, and donations. So fast forward to the current situation, it's changed. Madigan's gone. We have a new governor who at least says, pays lip service to the idea that it'll be a fairer process. And we have the legal situation where ComEd has already pled guilty because of its illegal lobbying activities. Exelon is at least under the microscope, and Madigan might still get indicted. So that's a whole new political ballgame. But once again, CEJA in its original form 2 years ago was crafted under the old system, which bought into the assumption that you won't get any energy legislation unless ComEd, Exelon get something too. That's changed, and we have not been able to persuade anyone of the stature that Evan is talking about. Citizens Utility Board, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, nobody. We can't persuade them that maybe we need to re-examine this situation and proceed with a CEJA that separates itself from nuclear in some way. And that has just not been able to, we haven't been able to get that message across. So I'm trying to at least bring you up to steam of the situation. There is hope because as I said earlier, the political alignments are shifting constantly. And we have to be nimble and in tune with how to do that disengagement that I think, Evan, you're looking for here. I don't know if that responded completely to your question, but at least I want to give an explanation of how we got where we are and why it seems like groups like NEIS aren't there. We're there. We testified at all the Senate hearings, the House hearings, regrettably not in support of FEJA and regrettably not in support of CEJA for the very reason that nuclear power would be subsidized.
Thanks, Dave.
And I could add, in Ohio right now, we've got, Ohio Citizen Action is making a lot of waves. And the Sierra Club, the Beyond Coal campaign has money, and they've been working on this too. And when I, back in when House Bill 6 was being debated, there were so many people, just really literally almost hundreds of people that went in and testified opposing the bill. There were, the Ohio Environmental Council, the ELPC, especially poignant were people in areas that had wind farms, and they were up in Northwest Ohio, and they were saying just how the farmers loved these wind, that they were getting paid lots of money and they were farming around the wind towers. And so the legislature doesn't have to pay attention to the voters or to because they're gerrymandered. They don't have to pay attention to the public opinion, I guess. So we're hopefully we're going to work and change that.
So I guess I get a follow-up, and not to drag this out too far, but I think we knew that we couldn't prevent the 2.4 billion payout. But maybe what was even more seductive was the idea that renewables couldn't grow fast enough to meet the shortfall if ComEd actually did come through on their threat to shut down their plants. Is that a valid argument? Was it then? Is it anymore?
Oh, David, answer that.
Yeah, there are, again, two parts to the answer. There was the discussion around FEJA, which is 2016 is when that passed. Back then, there were some consultants hired who did some preliminary study as to whether the shortfall could be made up by renewables. And they did it in a way where they varied the assumptions. The first assumption is, let's say one reactor closes. That would be Clinton. Let's say only Quad Cities would close. That would be 2 reactors. Would we be able to make the shortfall? Then there was the scenario of all 3 of them shutting. The preliminary analysis seemed to indicate that if it were just Quad Cities on its own or just Clinton, we should be able to do it without any problem. It got really iffy if all 3 would have been closed. But again, all of that was taking place under a whole different political consideration of Mike Madigan running the show, Exelon and ComEd running the show. That's 2016. Now we move forward. Exelon is back saying, oh yeah, now we might have to close Byron 1 and 2 and Dresden 2 and 3. That's 4 reactors this time. Would there be a shortfall? The analysis, we have not been able to see the analyses or the black box that generates them, but it seems to me the environmental community is operating under the assumption that those shortfalls would be made up by natural gas, and they don't want to do anything that will reinforce fossil fuel use of any kind. Certainly, we want the coal plants to go away. We're all on board for that. In fact, NEIS was on board for that long before Sierra Club and the current cast of characters. We were on this on 2007. Well, anyway, my question, and again, I don't get it answered very well, is essentially who says? And if you start working on legislation that uses more of a stick than a carrot in terms of how you make up the shortfall, I personally believe, but I can't verify it with numbers, that it would be difficult. But there is enough energy currently in the market where we could get by for the few years it would take to really ramp up the renewables to the scale where it would take over. But nobody's doing that calculation. You actually are anticipating next month's Night with the Experts, because we are privileged and just ecstatic the fact we are getting Mark Jacobson from Berkeley, who did an analysis and said years ago, Illinois can get to 100% renewables efficiency, and I guess you would add storage to it, without relying on fossil fuel intervention. So he'll be our speaker on April 29th, and he might be able to answer that question better than I can. So what I'm telling you, Evan, is the belief is within both the environmental community and certainly within the governor's office and all the power brokers in the state that if the reactors closed, it would be made up with gas and not renewables. And my question is, why? Why is that the case? Why isn't somebody forcing it to go a different direction? I'm not seeing it happen.
Well, there's a catch-22 also, because as they deep six all the renewables and do everything they can, like Ohio has this wind setback that's really, essentially, it's stopped all wind development in Ohio. And so when they do that, how is there ever going to be enough renewables to replace the plants?
Yeah, those Ohio setbacks are really idiotic. Okay, next we have Stephen Sondheim, then Catherine, and then Linda. So Steve, how about you?
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm wondering how the shenanigans, I'll call it, in Ohio, all of it, is affecting either the current use of nuclear power or the future use. I mean, are these plants running? Are they set to shut down? What are they going to do? In other words, how's this affecting the notion of using nuclear as our power supply? Pat or Terry, yeah.
Okay.
My prediction is, depending a lot on what appointment is made in early summer by the Biden administration, that nuclear is about to get slaughtered. But it depends a great deal on how much shoring up the Biden administration will be persuaded to implement. The problem is that, as Pat pointed out very accurately, FERC is sort of the forum where the utility industry, the nuclear industry, is going to go to try to salvage their rate setting, and it's now coming down to whether or not the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, becomes a more progressive, even slightly more consumer-oriented agency. It hasn't been friendly to the public historically, and I'm a little bit edgy about the prospects of the Biden administration. but that's kind of where it happens. Davis, Betsy, and Perry in Ohio are still running close to empty, but they have politically extricated. First Energy is in the process, at least, of withdrawing from the political hot seat. And, it's a big question as to how long of a political memory that the public has. The General Assembly's strategy from the start was we'll do some sort of shadow dance. We'll do some sort of shallow, superficial, punishmental looking kind of act. And we really don't intend to put the screws to First Energy for any of their wrongdoing. And they have somewhat successfully achieved that, although there's been a great deal of thrashing. People are feeling better about the pandemic. The pandemic is still significant news, but it isn't quite as preoccupying. And I'm sort of looking at like maybe the last 3 to 4 weeks. The House Bill 6 repeal stuff has been, people are frustrated and not seeing any progress. And then there's the announcement that First Energy has basically decided to cash in and go to FERC. So I think that's, it's not much of an answer, and everything continues to play out at this level that is still very much segregated from serious public input and opposition. And all of the institutional players, the electeds in Ohio, are still institutionally, if not personally, biased in favor of big utilities, big nuclear, big coal.
Well, I want to say, if it may address Stephen's question, but one of the things that's happening is that there's a huge push for what they call small modular nuclear reactors. They're probably not small, and they're probably not going to be modular, but they're definitely going to be nuclear. And it's all these pie in the sky things that there's so many different types that are every one of them is unproven and untested. And so what they all have in common is that they report there's 100% of the money is going to come from the public. So that's the latest scheme that's being pushed. I have no idea, how much traction that's getting here in Ohio or anywhere else in the country. But that's, that's the scheme to pretend that nuclear is viable and modern and is still moving along.
And it's going to save us from climate chaos. That's right.
Okay, Stephen, do you have any follow-up?
Well, yeah, it sounds like the whole thing's falling apart, but this futuristic thing that they're trying to do, and there's a hearing on it on the 30th, is trying to, anyway. I was just wondering if Davis, Bessie, or Perry could get new contracts, given that they're failing, and I hope not. To me, it seems like the key. Sorry, the key to all these things in Illinois too is to not to keep them alive. They can be phased out. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Terry.
No. Your point's well taken. We're in a different situation with Perry and Davis Bessie. They are not merchant plants. They are Energy Harbor, Pirates Cove plants that are providing electricity supposedly directly to the 9-state area that is owned or that is controlled by First Energy. It's going to be a long, slow death. I mean, this is as much as anything reminiscent of sort of a 1954 Japanese horror film, with the thrashing dinosaur dying slowly, and it's going to happen kind of because of capitalism, kind of because of the fact that these are aging rust buckets. I'm also, this is certainly not news. and I'm known for being a doomsayer, but we're approaching very much the useful, functional, stable end of the last generation of nuclear power, and something could break. Something serious could happen at any of a number, and in fact, a growing number of these large baseload nukes. As Pat pointed out, maintenance is being deferred, not tended to at all. Major retrofits are not happening. Safety measures that were ordered years, if not decades ago, that's not going down. So it's going to happen, and something it'll be sort of like the post Fukushima. How could this have happened? Couldn't anyone see this coming?
Yeah, we all see it.
50 of us see it tonight. You know.
Catherine? Catherine Bunton? Did we lose you?
I'm sorry, she's muted. Can you hear me?
I don't.
Jan?
Try again. Oh, now we can. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was muted. I'm sorry. Well, my question has pretty much been asked and answered. I guess I don't like the answer. That $2.3 billion that we gave to Exelon, I think over 10 years, that really needs to be taken back. And I was just hoping that with Madigan out and with so much change in Springfield, that it would be an opportunity for even groups like Sierra and NRDC and scientists, concerned scientists. I mean, it's been a time to, make it, make this point that money needs to come back. It could be used to build up the infrastructure we desperately need. But Dave, you didn't sound very optimistic that with all these changes that there isn't an opportunity here.
Well, contrary to Terry, I am a glass half broken person. So by nature, I'm very skeptical that politics will save us. Let's put it that way. But at the same time, it may be a crapola hand, but it's the hand we're dealt. So we got to deal with it. There are a lot of stellar individuals that Illinois has elected in the last several election cycles. I mean, people who I personally have some real faith in after having heard them talk. But, it's the kind of thing where you're going to have to work politics. And a lot of us aren't very good at that. But it really requires establishing a relationship, keeping credibility up, making your case. And then here's where it all breaks down, insisting that their job is governance and not politics. There is a difference. And until we insist that that's the way it goes, we're going to keep getting the output of politics. I'm sorry, Catherine, but when you get old, you kind of get cranky and depressed and less optimistic. So
we understand, Dave.
We've only been doing this 40 years, So.
Speak for yourself.
There you go, Jan. Well, I have one.
It's just we're not getting old, It's not that we're not depressed.
I just want to share that I'm almost finishing this little book by Stan Cox. And I think most of us probably know everything in the first half of the book, but in the second half of the book, it's called The Green New Deal and Beyond. And he talks a lot about, since we only have about 9 years to, figure out a new energy system, he talks an awful lot about rationing energy and the fact that we can live with a lot less energy. And I think that he is giving us in the second half of that book the outline that we need to use in terms of changing the public conversation, because people are not, I didn't like reading what I was reading. I mean, we live a very comfortable life the way it is now, but I do think that efficiency will be very important while you're trying to build up the new energy and get rid of the fossil fuels, coal, nuclear. Anyway, it's just a wonderful way for us, I come with a climate group, to start talking about this a little differently and preparing ourselves and our neighbors and friends for, probably needing to rethink how much energy we use every week and every month.
Okay. Our next question comes from Linda Lewison, and after that, Carolyn Treadway wants to ask a question. So go ahead, Linda.
Well, I had a question when I started, but right now it's going to be more of a comment, just following up on what Catherine just said, that we really need to look at, as Catherine was alluding to and others, a set of different assumptions. And the assumption that, is in terms of supply and demand, Catherine is suggesting that, or the book is suggesting that we're always thinking about satisfying all the demand. And what this guy is saying is maybe the demand has to change, not just working on the supply side to meet every device that will dry our nails electronically and, electrically and all the rest of it. So we have to look at a different set of assumptions. And in the work that we've been doing on this decommissioning working group, this national group, there's a subcommittee of talking about costs and benefit, doing cost benefit analysis. And I just want to suggest a different frame for what we're talking about now, a larger picture, that we don't compare what it's going to cost to keep the nukes on and, get to renewables or however long, that we have to say that the alternative to, let's say, going without energy, maybe there'll be gaps or brownouts or something much more serious than filling every need at every minute for every person, is, we're facing a mega disaster. As Terry was talking about, these plants aren't going to last. Or as Mike has been quoted as saying lately, the lake is going to eat these reactors within 5 years. I mean, that's the reality. So the alternative in terms of cost benefit is a mega disaster. What's going to happen when San Onofre goes to Southern California, et cetera? Not how much it costs in a smaller way, renewables versus anything else. So I just think we need to use that as the comp, which we're all agreeing to here in different ways, to the comp of what we're facing now. That's number one. And number two is just going back to Evan and your question. And Evan, you probably know this much more from the inside than I do, because you've worked for Sierra Club so much more closely for so many years, is the story of the environmental community in Illinois, as Dave described it, is much more involved than, what we can say tonight.
Definitely.
But the point of this discussion tonight is that here are the same organizations, Sierra Club, ELPC, maybe you've said this before tonight, we're taking exactly the opposite stand, or much more of the other way, to fight in Ohio than in Illinois. And that's why what you're saying, Terry and Pat, is so instructive to us and helps us shed some needed light on the games and the hidden agendas that are not so hidden agendas that are being played out right now in Illinois. And as Dave has said, the sands are shifting, the players are changing, and perhaps there'll be some more opportunities. But these people have to come out of hiding. Sierra Club needs to oppose this bill because of their own national policy. That isn't happening. And people like you who are very active in Sierra Club need to be saying that. Excuse me, I don't mean people like you individually, Evan. I mean Sierra Club members in Illinois have never been organized significantly against nuclear energy, but yet we have the Nuclear Free Core Team National that has helped Sierra Club national policy be what it is, if you look on the website, very strongly against all aspects of nuclear power.
And what you need at the chapter level, at the state level, is to get strong anti-nuclear activists to run for office in their local group, and maybe start in the local group, but work their way up to the chapter. So the Sierra Club has, when you're a member, you're a member at the national level, and then you're a member at the chapter level, which is essentially each state is a chapter, not quite, but sort of. And then there's the geographic area of a state is broken up into what they call groups working on a particular geographic area. So, so I was the chair of the Central Ohio group, which included 20 some counties around Columbus. And I did that for 9 years. And then I was a member of the Ohio chapter, and being a strong anti-nuclear activist and others involved, we made sure that the Ohio chapter wasn't going to, was not going to support any nuclear power. And that, well, I don't know that Ohio would have, but it certainly, we were there to make sure that it wouldn't. But it really takes the local Sierra Club activists on the ground that know something about nuclear to make that difference.
That's right. And let me just say, we tried that.
We have one more question. It's 2 minutes to whatever time. Okay. And we had one more question. I don't know whether we can get Carolyn's in. Can you hurry with your question, Carolyn?
Yes. It's not a question, it was a comment, and it's a little out of phase now because I was speaking to what Catherine, I believe her name is, had said about the second half of the book, about using less. And I wanted to lift that up because that's so absolutely crucial that we each of us and teach others that what we need to do is live more simply so that others may live, as a poster that I used to have on my wall said. And I find that whole dimension of our relationship to the land and the indigenous people who know how to live on the land and keep on living, and the land keeps on living, and all of that. I just find that so sorely missing in climate action circles. And I wish for more of the sacred connection was in our work.
Very good.
And I would say it takes more than just individual actions, because when we live in this competitive social structure, I think maybe Terry was getting at that, but we instead of cooperation, we have competition, and that competition just creates scarcity. And whereas cooperation and sharing creates abundance. And so we have to move on. And I know our time is getting short, but there's a lot of philosophical questions and our social, and looking at our social structure and how it's not sustainable.
I agree with you totally. I just put in a
we really have to
sacred.
turn it back to Gail. The time is gone, and unmute yourself, Gail, because we have to bring the meeting to a close.
Oh, we could keep going, but we'd like to keep going. But I see, it's 2 hours, and we don't want to wear out our experts. Maybe we'll have to have a second round of Night with the Experts on this topic, especially as things move along. Who knows what updates are around the corner? We could go another month and have a whole new agenda of things that happen with the nuclear industry. So Dave is going to have some final business here to wrap up with everybody. But I just want to thank you, Pat and Terry, both for hanging in there tonight. It's a little later for them than it is for us here in Illinois. So thank you so much for hanging in with us. And we hope everybody, as we said, this is recorded and we will have an edited version of it. And we don't really cut much out. We just cut out, the instructions and things like that. So it's really nice to share with people that either your legislators or people that would be interested that weren't able to make it tonight. So I'm going to turn this over to Dave and let him do the final closure here. Thank you, everyone.
Now, some good news. Next month, April, is Earth Month. And NEIS will be sending you an announcement about this because we have 3 really neat events coming up and 3 fundraising opportunities, which won't really cost you anything, but can help us a lot. So just real quickly, we are going to do 2 Night with the Experts next month. I mentioned earlier that we've got Mark Jacobson coming in on the 29th to talk about how Illinois can go to 100% renewables. But we've also cut a deal with filmmaker Robbie Lepser, who put out a movie a few years ago called Power Struggle. And we are going to be cooperating with him to make that film available to y'all for the month of April. There is a ticket you have to purchase, but NEIS will get 50% of the ticket proceeds, and you'll get to see one hell of a video, which in 90 minutes chronicles the shutdown of the Vermont Yankee reactor and how people did it. So it's a real organizing tool, and we hope you'll take advantage of that. And to crown that off, we're actually going to have Robbie on a special Night with the Experts on Earth Day, April 22nd, which is a Thursday evening. So we'll get you announcements about that. So when you check the email, there will also be 3 opportunities to help us out in fundraising. I already mentioned one of them, which is buying tickets to see the movie Power Struggle. But we're also going to be collaborating with opportunities for people to sign up for community solar farms. And for every subscription that we help get signed up, the vendors will be donating $100 to NEIS. So you may take a look at that and see if that fits your interests, your pocketbook, and you might want to subscribe. So watch for the email tomorrow on that one. So again, thank you for coming tonight. It's been a long evening, I know, and I appreciate everybody's patience. Make sure you save the chat box like I said. And, oops, I messed it up again here, it looks like. Let me just put up a screen for you here so you can see this. There we go. Oh, I can't do it now. Oh dear. Never mind. So thanks for coming. Tune in to us next week. Check the calendars, watch your emails, and help us get people to that hearing next week. Thank you very much.